The play I want to tell you about is that Romeo and Juliet. Now, there was the real thing. It's a story about love, a story about a boy and a girl who in love of one another, don't you see? And everything would have been just fine except their daddies didn't get along. No, they didn't. And when the play opens, Juliet's daddy was throwing this big fancy dress ball, and he invited the whole town, but he didn't invite none of Romeo's folks. He didn't. And his buddies learned of it, and they put him into slipping on this costume and slipping into the party. And he was a funky kind of a boy, and he did it. Well, everything was going good, and about that time, Juliet stepped out on everything was going fine until Juliet came down the stairs. And Romeo was so struck by her that he did a soliloquy right there. And somewhere in it, it wasn't about to be or not to be. It was about to do or not to do. Well, the do's won out over the don'ts, and so he went and took her by the hand, and they were going out into the yard there. They were going, but a fellow Tybalt recognized Romeo for who he was and was come up on Romeo picking a fight. Well, Juliet's daddy didn't want any bloodshed there in his living room, and so he told them to go on out. And they did. But Romeo didn't go straight home. No, he went out and hid in the yard and waited until everybody had left. And when everybody had gone, he popped up and looked around. And he saw this light off in the distance. And he said, "Hark, what light by yonder window shines?" He did. And let me tell you, Juliet stepped out onto her bedroom window stoop, and she looked out across the way there and gave this soliloquy. And somewhere in it, she said, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" Well, he popped up and said, "I'm right here." Well, as it happened, there was this great big pea vine growing up to where Juliet was standing, and so he clumb up it. And that's where they had that balcony scene. And during that scene, Romeo decided that he wanted to get married. And so she said, "When?" And he said, "Now." And that proves that he was an honorable boy about it all. That he wasn't up there for no light courting. He wanted to get on with it. Back then, the reason that everyone lived in castles is that there were so many of them to put up of extended family. Well, there were so many there that night that they had to keep a preacher on duty both day and night. Fella, Friar Lawrence was his name. And so Romeo and Juliet decided that they would go down and wake him up and tell him what it was that they wanted to do. And he thought that was all right, and so he married them right there. Well, things being as they were with Romeo and all, Friar Lawrence thought that he ought to go on home and lay low for a while. And Romeo, he didn't take too hotly to that, but he did. He went on home and he waited. And while Romeo went on home, and he decided he would lay low till things cooled off. And while Romeo was home, Juliet's mama took a great notion that she ought to get married. Well, Juliet decided that there would be a problem there because she didn't want two husbands to take care of, because Romeo would be enough by himself. And so Juliet went down to Friar Lawrence to see what it was she was going to have to do. And he mixed up this drink for her to drink, and she drank it and fell out across the bed there, and everybody thought that she was dead. And they had this big, pretty funeral, and she was not dead. And them boys in Romeo's neighborhood told him that she was dead before Friar Lawrence could get word back to him. And so Romeo didn't think that life held much for him, so he went out and got this big can of lye to drink. And he drank it. He came to where Juliet was and opened that tomb, drank the lye, and with his last words he said, "Oh, my love, oh, my wife, with this kiss I die." And he drank it and fell out across her there, and the weight of Romeo falling across her woke her up. And she woke up and saw him laying dead and didn't figure that life held much for her. So she took his knife and run it through her, and she expired. Well, the moral of the story is, if you don't want the expense of a double funeral on you, the best thing for you to do, if you have a boy that likes your girl or the other way around, is for you to let them have a cheap wedding.